This is the Forbes Books Podcast, conversations with amazing humans who are impacting the world of business and beyond. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila, and today I've got a trailblazer in the field of behavioral health and wellness who is building a business dedicated to holistic well-being. At the core, Dr. Rob Douk's approach is his 9 dimensions philosophy, which views well-being as encompassing the emotional, physical, occupational, social, spiritual, intellectual, creative, environmental, and financial aspects of life. As the founder of the Well Club, he's on the mission to facilitate whole person transformation of the mind, body, and spirit. Dr. Douk, how are you?
Oh, so good. Aloha.
Aloha to you as well. And I want to start talking about your dimensions, your 9 dimensions, because there's one that I'm struggling with. And we're going to get into most of them, but I want to start with financial.
Sure.
I drive my wife crazy, Dr. Douk, because I am frugal to a fault. It will take me 2 weeks to pick out an iPhone case that's going to cost me $20 because I'm going to look at every review. I'm constantly checking my bank app. I'm constantly checking my 401k. I can't get out of this cycle of worrying about money, even though, I mean, I guess we all should worry about it, but I'm worrying more than I should. First of all, I know you're not you're going to psychoanalyze me today, but What's wrong with me, Dr. Douk? What's going on?
No, you know what? There's these great tools out there. You know, my study at Harvard, we learned a lot about lifestyle medicine. And what I break down to these 9 dimensions, and you're alluding to the finance piece of it, right? And you said it perfectly. When we think of finance, there's so much attached to that. It's not just finance, but you're looking at things. That means you're ruminating or being anxious about it, right? Of the future finances. So there's a lot more involved there than we really give it credit for at times. And that's why we look at it from a framework of these 9 dimensions working together, the mind, body, spirit. But within each of those domains, even when you're talking about finance, that falls under what I would call the mind piece of things, right? And then you have the intellectual and creative wellness there too. But yeah, that's a little bit of a loaded question because now you're looking at all the, and how they interlace with the other dimensions with career wellness and creative wellness and your social wellness and everything else. And we really can't neglect one area. We've got to look at it all from a multifaceted.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So when it comes to the 9 dimensions, it's a very holistic approach. Like you can't cherry pick, hey, I'm going to be good at the physical part, but I'm going to neglect the mental part. Why is it important to look at it from this perspective?
Yeah. I mean, take yourself, for example. We started out talking about the financial wellness piece of it. If you're hyper focused on just that, you may, in our initial assessment, you may actually do really well because you have a splinter skill there and you're so cognizant of it. You're budgeting, you're doing everything that you need to do. You're reading up on it, but maybe you're neglecting social wellness, right? As a result, because you just kind of shunned everybody else out, or you've neglected your physical wellness because you haven't worked out in forever because, all you're focusing on is meeting these budgetary constraints. So that's why it's really good when you have a coach that can help you take a step back and let's look at the whole picture, right? Who are you now today? Where do we want to go? And where are the lack of vitamins, if you will, in other domain areas that we want to kind of beefing up? And what we're learning more and more in the research is that they all work together. Harvard, Dr. Benson did a lot of work on the mind-body connection. That's been really well accepted. And now we're learning the spiritual connection and that aspect of things too, and how you really can't leave one area out if you want a full abundance in life, at least.
Yeah, no, it's great. And you talk about the mind-body connection, and I'm old enough to remember that the idea of meditation was weird. Like now you have, as a card-carrying Gen Xer, I know that if you were spiritual or if you were doing things that were outside of Western norms, you looked like a weirdo. And now you see companies investing into mental health. You have mental health apps and companies that have really flourished in the last 20 years. So tell me about, and I know I'm a little older than you, Dr. Douk, but tell me about this sort of transition period over the last 20, 30 years where East has met West and it's been accepted.
That's absolutely right. I think COVID really kickstarted a lot of that. It helps to see us as a society start to kind of go back to ancient practices that have always worked. And now we're bringing the science and overlaying it and looking at, for example, there's a famous study done on HIV patients, and they followed these folks around for 6 years. And those that meditate and have hope and a faith in a God live longer than everybody else by 76%. So it's almost as if their faith and everything that they're doing about prayer and meditation is actually activating these healing agents in them. To geek out just for a moment, really what I'm talking about is the autonomic nervous system. So we were created to be able to fight and flight, right? Which then kickstarts our stress response. But if we're always living in a constant state of stress and fight and flight, that stress response then results in high cortisol levels, high blood pressure, immune system becomes compromised. And that's just not the way to live. So what we're really trying to do when we look at things more holistically from the 9 dimensions is to get people into the parasympathetic nervous system. And when you look at how the body responds to that, it's no wonder why, stress is the number one silent killer. Stress is the beginning stage of manifesting to all other sorts of chronic diseases. But when we can be in the parasympathetic nervous system, guess what? Where our heart rate goes down, we're more calm, we're able to access information, and we're able to make better choices and decisions. And so we work with elite athletes too, and some of them are built just like you and I, Joe. And then you got to wonder, why are these guys winning in the Masters? And why are they able to swing a golf club with such consistency? Sure, they practice a lot, but they're able to anchor and unlock this part of the brain that allows them to have faith in their ability, faith in the outcome. So why not apply that to the rest of us? Is when we're faced with stress, we can actually combat that and unlock this part of the brain that impacts not just the brain, but the body and just our whole being. And that promotes us to be better husbands, better wives, better parents, better siblings, better coworkers even, right? So we work with companies also in corporate America that want their labor force to be healthy. And they're starting to understand the ROI behind that too. That if I've got a healthy labor force, they're better salesmen and women, they provide better service, and the list goes down, right? So I'm passionate about being behind this big movement of wellness and really bringing the science behind it all. Like you said, it's not this hokey pokey thing you do anymore, right? It's actually really well backed by science now that this stuff is really good for you.
Wow. And you mentioned faith, and one of the dimensions is spirituality. And I know there have been a lot of stats and surveys about more and more people now are agnostic or atheist. I think it's like 50% of the country nowadays. So if you have someone like that, maybe they come to you, Dr. Douk, like, yeah, I'm good with the 8 dimensions, but don't with the spirituality piece, I don't want to get involved with it. Tell me about how that fits the mold when you have this new, it's this generational shift that's been happening over the last couple decades of people just not being into, choosing a team, so to speak, when it comes to religion, right. Or they could be spiritual in other nature. So how does that fit into the 9 dimensions?
I'm so glad you brought that topic up, because I think that's at the cornerstone of what we're looking to do here. And we don't look at, the religion's a bad word, and I don't kind of identify with religion because I look at that more as a set of rules, but I look at a relationship with our soul and a relationship with something that's larger than ourselves. And I'm not here to recite scripture. I'm here to recite science, and I'm here to recite what's worked for me. And so when I look at that, I think this really gives us an opportunity for all of us within humanity to take a harder look at, wellness is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And think about where that's mostly focused. It's focused on gaining knowledge for our minds, perfecting our bodies, whether that be, just diet and exercise or even more enhancements. We're so focused on the outward piece of it. It was almost like we're masking ourselves, and as long as we look good in the mirror, doesn't matter if you're at your desired weight, but if you're still binge drinking, binge smoking, and everything else, the internal organs are not going to last. But even if we go a layer deeper, we all have souls, and there's more to us that we can invest into. And we don't often do that because it's not so outwardly apparent to us, right? You put on a few pounds after Thanksgiving, you're like, man, I got to get back on that treadmill or go out and run again. But think about how much more abundantly we can live if we actually take care of the core of who we are. And you can't have that discussion without talking about spirituality. And I think we can actually start talking about that in a much broader context that it isn't a turnoff because everyone's got different walks of life, different experiences. But here, I'm here to share the science about faith and how someone who has faith actually has so many different compounding benefits on the wellness side of things. And that's why when we build the 9 dimensions, you can't really neglect that piece. But also, you can't only solely focus on that as well and neglect everything else. There's no discriminating here. Everybody welcome to the party, and we can all work together and talk about it as we build this community.
Wow. And let's talk about the current state of healthcare. And without getting too conspiratorial here, it almost feels like the ideas of capitalism have turned healthcare into sick care. Like there's more money into getting people well after they're sick. So the idea of preventative measures is all fairly new. Like even though medicine in modern medicine is fairly new in terms of it's like a blip on the of the radar of life because it's only been 100 years of modern medicine or so.
Right.
So tell me about now how we change the mindset of not sick care but health care.
That's so good. I love how you coined that actually. And yeah, that's really what we're talking about here. And I think there is a movement towards this because people, even the healthcare system, starting to understand that if we do preventative measures up front, I can save a lot in the back end. So people are not developing these chronic diseases that I have to treat and have my hospitals be inundated. I mean, we just lived through and survived through COVID, didn't we? Our healthcare system really needs to be relooked at. And this is a real powerful, compelling option is to like, hey, let's just get everybody well out of the gate. And so if we can do these things, then we can avoid a lot of the chronic things that we're actually dealing with, anxiety being one of them. If we can actually center ourselves and give ourselves new perspectives and think about, gosh, yes, I do have this new job that I have to attend. So we work with a lot of executives that now have to become CEOs for the first time. And, they present well, they go and put on the suits and they do everything well, but the toll it takes on them, the lack of sleep that goes into that, the mental preparation, to have a coach on your side to really talk you through that and to give you the perspective that, hey, you can do this. Look at your track record. Here's how we're going to breathe when we're up there. Here's how we're going to handle stress when it comes. And here's how we're going to live a balanced life because this new position is going to consume you. And that's why these 9 dimensions is a great framework of how to really combat that.
Nice. And you use the word well in there. Nice way to weave that in there because a lot of it revolves around the well club. But let's break down that word for a second. What does it mean to be well? And I know it's kind of a weird kind of random question. It's like, how do you define the word the? But what does well mean to you?
Gosh, well to me means living in the full abundance that we were all created to live. I'll be vulnerable for a minute here. I've been on my own wellness journey and still on it now. And outwardly looking in, I had this successful business that grew almost overnight, and we were in multiple states, thousands of employees, and that stress took a huge toll on me and the impact it made on my wife and my children. And I ultimately, it became far bigger than me. I brought in a professional team to take it to the next level because I had the foresight to know that I wasn't well, and I was a doctor. And here I am prescribing all this information and helping people get well. But meanwhile, man, boy, was I sick in a lot of these areas, right? I was achieving financial wellness. I was doing all these things right on the outward. So then I started doing the inner work. Who am I without being a founder and CEO of a company? Who am I when all those titles are stripped away? And then you know what I found? It was the most freeing thing, Joe. I found freedom. I found freedom in playing again. Allowing myself to have hobbies, allowing myself to take an afternoon. COVID actually taught us a lot of that, just to have family time. And then, I started discovering this new side of me that revolutionized my mind to this new season that I'm in, which is looking and chasing after wellness. And with that, we unlock this freedom of life in its full abundance. So in a long about way, wellness is accessing abundance in life. which we all can do without medication, without any stimulants or anything like that. We have it inside of us to heal and to unlock that with the right coaching.
Wow. Well, I often say that people don't change, but they can improve themselves. It's like we're all big iPhones. Like we just update our software and we get better.
Yeah.
But I also say that smart people can be the dumbest people. Like you are obviously we're a smart business person, a smart doctor, yet you were too dumb to realize what you were doing to yourself. So why do you think that happens? Is it because we're so terrible at self-awareness that we just don't get what's happening in our normal day-to-day life, where we're moving so fast that we neglect things, whether it's our bodies, whether it's our mind, whether it's our families, it could be anything. Why do you think we have such a terrible relationship with self-awareness? Or why maybe you? Because maybe that affects to you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It affects to me and it affects everyone that I work with. I think you hit on it. You use the words fast, self-awareness, all those things, right? Because I feel like we have evolved into a society that has accepted that stress is a normal part of life, okay? And I'm here to really petition against that could be a part of life, but to have that switch be on at all times, your body doesn't know any different. If you're going to be hyper vigilant, and sometimes I would go to sleep and write an entire business plan, wake up and have an idea. Like, when do I turn off? You know what I mean? So that I was getting burnt out. And so part of it is awareness. And I walk people through these 5 steps when we coach them. So all of our coaches help people within these 9 dimensions of wellness. There's 5 steps. And the first step's knowledge. So having this discussion that we have right now is new knowledge and new wisdom as we share new studies that are out about the goodness of breath work or taking time out to just reflect, you know, and what good that does for you. And what I started learning, Joe, is that for me to pause and go for a 5 or 10 minute walk to think through my situation rather than just push through kind of the American way, right? And there's a lot of good traits there. Let's just get it done. Let's grind it through. I get epiphanies, I get revelations that can fast track my work by years with an aha moment. So now I'm starting to lean on that side more rather than this hungry grit side. And so our 5 steps is knowledge. Now, what do you do with that knowledge? You still have a choice to believe it or not, or to put it into practice. But the more you choose, the more control you feel, right? And really, life is just a series of choices. You've got birth, choices, and then death. So we oversimplify and say, hey, let's help you make as many right choices to benefit you and those around you. And as you start doing that, you're going to develop what in the 3rd step is what we call a belief system. And that belief system is so powerful, whether you want to call that faith or a belief system in yourself and your coaches and your new model, because that leads to habits. And habits are hard to break, boy. Good habits are hard to break. Bad habits are hard to break, right? We both know that. But once you develop that habit, here's the kicker. You will lead into freedom. And the freedom that I talk about is so powerful. We're talking about epigenetics here, right? So like if you're born into a family whose dad's an alcoholic and beats on mom, and that's all you've seen growing up. So that's trauma, that's impacted you. Now you go through the 5 steps, you obtain knowledge of how to avoid that for yourself and for your kids. You make the choice to avoid that. You believe that you're not going to be that. You create habits that avoids that. Your genetic makeup, you're impacting your environment, and your behavior will impact your children and your offsprings and your great grandkids. So you could break that cycle. So the message I'm delivering is not just of freedom, but hope in the future. I gave a talk in Japan 3 weeks ago, and I shared this. And the coolest thing was this founder CEO who's burnt out, I could tell. I had a conversation with him. But of all the things I shared, he brought his wife the next day to say, hey, our marriage still has hope. Because when I was abusive with my words, when I was short with you because I was working 14 hours, I ruined our marriage. But because of all this newfound knowledge, he's like, yeah, we could build new neural pathways through neuroplasticity, which we talk a lot about too, that we can rewire some of this and build new ways and new memories to offset some of that trauma from the past. So there is hope in broken marriages. There is hope in broken families.
Wow, that's great. And I often say we sure love sprints, but we hate marathons.
Yeah,
And for a
that's
lot
right.
of what you're talking about is you got to put in the work and you got to put in the time. I mean, people ask me all the time, like, how do you grow a podcast? I'm like, do 1,000 episodes and then see if you have an audience at the end of it. Like, you're not going to the world of instant gratification. I'm not going to get into it. I get we all want instant gratification, but in the health piece. Much has been said about Ozempic and these weight loss drugs because people are like, okay, we finally got that silver bullet that we've been waiting for 40 years of this obesity epidemic in this country. We just take this shot and we can lose all the weight. I don't know if you care to weigh in on this and this
Sure.
phenomenon now, but tell me about what you see as sort of like the future in terms of people chasing that silver bullet.
Right. I think you're spot on with like the instant gratification. You know what? To a large extent, I understand a lot of patients who come see me have dealt with they've tried everything. And I can, and I understand why, because they come from a place of hurt, a place from trying everything and they're exhausted. So if someone's promised them a magic pill and they can take that, given the stressors of life, because they still have to cook, clean, and be a boss and be an employee and do everything else, the quick fix is there, right? The problem with that is the truth is those are only half truths. And I'm very wary with half truths that are not full truths because they're not sustainable. You might get like quick gains, but when they're quick gains, I'm very cautious with that too, because it's doing something that is stimulating or manipulating our natural makeup to accomplish a very quick gain is not likely to sustain, right? If it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. So
Right.
The truth is when we look at, and that's why I think there's this resurgence of these ancient practice that our ancestors have been practicing for hundreds of years, that we are now looking at it closer and saying, gosh, someone who meditates 3 to 4 times a week for at least 15 minutes yields these amazing health benefits. No wonder why they lived differently before, And so we're starting to incorporate those things. So when we look at it, it's not a fad that we're looking at. We look at everything that's empirically validated, for one. And we look at a lot of naturalistic stuff that the body can actually do on its own. But it's not this weird kind of hokey pokey stuff, right? It's actually really backed by sound science. We talked about it earlier. It's a proactive approach. So understanding how to be successful and how to access abundance is part of the key. And you can't do that on your own, because where can you go now these days online to actually get validated, empirically researched things out there that you can actually trust? So that's why we're building a library of classes and things for people on all, in a broad walk of life. Everyone comes from different places, and there is no one size fit all. And that's why everything has to be such a tailored approach. So we always start with a real comprehensive, assessment of where we're all at and what we need to be working on in different seasons. And I always call it seasons because much like the weather and the seasons throughout the year, we also face different seasons in life. We might have a lot of victories in this season. Let's celebrate those. But some of us are in really, really dark seasons, and we need each other as well within this community to pull through.
Nice. And you talk about technology, and I always ask this of tech entrepreneurs who are also working in sort of that mental health or even like diet space, is that how do you thread that needle of we got to get people off these goddamn phones, yet they got to use the goddamn phone to use the technology to do whether it's the Headspace app or their Weight Watchers app. How do we come to terms with that? Is it just that, hey, at least now we're using the phone for good as opposed to scrolling through Twitter? Talk about that.
My approach just in life in general is I'm never, I don't hate on what's going on, right? I think I participate is really kind of like the name of the game, in a way where if the kids are on their phones now, let's compete in that space, right? Let's get some positive content in there. So I've got my, I have social media. I was, initially very kind of shy to doing social media, but you can't get around not doing social media now. But at least my contribution is going to be around health and wellness and hopefully positivity in the world. So if they're scrolling and I'm in there, why wouldn't I, offer myself up in that space? And similarly, if we're not looking at, if we're so scared of these environments, like AI, for example, that's kind of, maybe I might get canceled after the first show here, but like, we can't be scared of it. We got to understand it and we got to leverage it for good. So, I look at every invention, everything that's good in the world usually starts with good intentions, and sometimes it kind of gets manipulated down the way and gets kind of watered down. But if we are coming in with good hearts and good intentions, why not maximize it for good? So I think the apps and the phones, someone who's hyperventilating right before a meeting because they're like, oh shoot, like I'm not prepared for this, and they can look at my app and walk them through these 5 steps and regain themselves and become composed, and then walk right in rather than popping a pill. Sign me up all day long. I'll participate in that space. I'll compete in that space. And that's kind of the approach we've been taking with this too. It's like, yeah, where is everybody at, right? Wellness is huge, but I'm tackling wellness not just from the outer appearance, but the internal. And that's where we draw our strength from. And so like my patients, those are the guys I'm so proud of. Like they come in, they want to work on, everything that you can see from the outside, but they want more. They're like, wait, I could do more. My body could do more. My soul could do more. They become transformed. So we're not here to just shed a few pounds. We're here to transform people for good and have it be sustainable. And the weight and everything and how well you look is just secondary to everything else that we're doing. It's just a byproduct of just living well.
Another thing us humans love to do is we love to overcomplicate the simple.
That's right.
My football coach used to tell me, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
How do you simply communicate this to folks? Because these 9 dimensions, it's deep. It's not just like a what do you call a project management software app where you're just checking boxes. There's more to it. How do you simplify something that can be complicated?
So we have a platform that train new coaches, and the coaches who come in can be a little intimidating, right? At first, by what's these 9 dimensions about? It's really not that big a deal, really, once you get into it. And here, I'll put it simply this way. We train our patients to look at truths versus lies. What lies have we bought in that is haunting us still? And we're looking at things from the past, which is depression, or we're so worried about the future, that's anxiety. And the lies that I'm saying is, you'll have a client or a patient come in and say, yeah, I've bought into the lie that what my mom told me is that I'm never going to amount to anything. And so they have this trauma that they're trying to overcompensate. And they're like, now once they make that connection, then the healing can really take place. So to really oversimplify it, we in a society, the reason why we resort to fight or flight and we're living in the stress response is we've bought into some of these lies that if I don't do this, if I don't do that, then these gnarly bad things are going to happen. But if we unravel some of that and we really look at what's the truth here, that truth will set you free. And that's the work of the coach and the patient working together to determine what that is. And I mean, how they say really simply, no amount of worry ever really changes an outcome, right? That's essentially kind of what we're talking about here too. It's like that ruminating, that worry that you're doing, what lies have really preoccupied that and have anchored you so deeply into that? And let's break you free from that and tell you what the truth is. Actually, here's the truth. You can have control over your life. You can actually choose to be different than your parents. You can choose to not make that mistake again if you just did this now. So it works not just in life, but with elite athletes. And this is the mindset of Olympians, They've been trained and conditioned to think this way. Now we can apply this to just everyday life, and we can all be our own, gold medalists in every aspect of life.
And how does philosophy play in what you do? Because a lot of the things that you're saying ring true to me to Stoicism. So is that intentional or unintentional?
I believe, and this is probably a deeper conversation, but that all truths come from the same place. And that's really why I oversimplify it with just truth. Like, what truths are going to benefit you? Let's unravel the lies. And so, I mean, in therapy, that's essentially what we're doing. We're listening to patients, month after month, and really trying to lead them to the truth that's already within them. And so here we are a little bit more direct in that approach, where we say, hey, you know what? Tell me a little bit about your background. And then we start to hear these lies that they've been kind of, carrying all these years. And then the freedom that we give them is, hey, let's just strip away those lies. Here's the actual truth. I'm handing it right in front of you. Now it's up to you to choose. So we do that knowledge piece, and then people choose. They start to believe. They start to build habits. Voila, they start to lead into freedom. And it's a beautiful place to be.
Doc, lastly, let's talk about legacy, because you talked about the come to Jesus moment you had, but what do you want Dr. Douk's legacy to be after going through this journey of discovery, and what you plan on doing for the rest of your life?
Oh man, my older self would have given you like 3 or 4 bullets of boom, this is what I want. But I'm much more of a freer being these days, that it could be anything. The only one thing that I hope to get out of my legacy would be that I was known to be someone who helped others. And that could be a 1-person capacity, 100 million person capacity. And that's why I'm freely sharing a lot of what I've learned in my own journey. I mean, I was obsessively learning this because as a doctor who was still struggling myself, I went back to school to get retrained on all this. And what I'm learning is just, we have it all within us to have this access of abundance in life, that why not share it now? Just super excited to do that.
Well, that's awesome, Dr. Douk. And so for folks who want to find out more about you, connect with you, where should they start?
A really good place would be my personal website, where I monitor all the emails that I reply, and that's at drdouk.com. That's drdouk.com. And then if you want to go straight to learn more about wellness, we have a ton of free, we're getting ready to launch that, so it's not available yet, but you'll be able to take a free assessment on the 9 dimensions of wellness, kind of gauge where you're at, and then also be able to sign up for the app. And that's at thewellclub.com.
Awesome. His name is Dr. Rob Douk. Doctor, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
And that'll do it for another Forbes Books podcast. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. You can always connect with me on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Joe Pardavila, or TikTok at J Pardavila. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.